Hi, I'm back. Okay, when we left off the other day, we were talking about some of the tools that the Federal Reserve Bank, the central bank of the United States, uses to control money, the monetary supply. Okay, we measure it through 6, sometimes 7 different metrics. I illustrated the most common ones, M1 and M2. You need to be responsible for these, friends, and please know that everything that's in M1 is also in M2, but M2 is broader, as you can see. Okay, these are the same numbers I demonstrated with from our text the other day. Okay? All right. Then we talked about the 3 tools that the government does have, and I keep saying the government. That's not correct. Okay? Even though the government and the Federal Reserve are very closely and politically intertwined, okay, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, really deals on its own with a great deal of autonomy. Okay? The 3 tools that the Fed uses are the reserve requirement, the discount rate, and open market operations. Just to refresh you from the other day, okay, the reserve requirement, right now, I don't believe this has changed. They bracket it, so if a bank has, let's say, well, in this case in the book, I said, for example, 90 million in reserves. Then on the first 12.4 million, they don't have to hold anything in their vault. They can loan it all out. Anything over 12.4 million but less than 79.5 million is 3%. And then anything over 79.5 million is 10%. Okay, so I gave you an example in the book, and someone asked if I could elaborate on that a tiny bit, so I'm going to take a moment and do that. Okay, so I just dashed this one out for you. If a bank has 200 million in reserves, I just picked that number out of the air. Under the current guidelines that I used in this citation, page 52, and I want to put this bracketing aside for a demonstration of the 3rd tool. I'm going to make it easier for you, okay? But if I ask you to use these guidelines on page 52 for a number, in this case 200 million, how much does the bank have to keep in its vault? And you could also say, given that, then how much of that 200 million can they lend out? Okay, so I'm going to say on the first 12.4 million, okay, it's going to be simple. It's going to be $12,400,000, okay, times, and I've got to widen that, I guess. There we are, times 0. Okay, so as we all know, that of course is going to be 0. They don't have to hold anything back. That money is essentially free for them. Okay, anything between 79.5 million and the first 12.4 million, okay, what would that be? Okay, up to 79.5 million. Well, we've already accounted for the first 12.4 million, so it's going to be 79,500 minus the 12,400 that we've already accounted for. Okay, that's $67,100,000, then that's going to be at 3%. So if we take that amount of money and multiply it by 0.03, 3%, right? That's going to be another $2,013,000. Okay, and then the final amount will be 200 million. That's how much the bank has, and the difference between that and the 79.5 million that we've already accounted for. Okay, let's see what we get. Minus 79.5. Okay, that's going to be $120,500,000. We are going to hold back 10% of that amount. Okay, so how much must they have in their vault? Okay, let me widen this up for you. Okay, so I'm going to say that they must hold in vault, and of course it doesn't have to be in their vault, it can also be on deposit with the Federal Reserve. So let me put some lines down here for you. Okay, they must hold a total of $14,063,000. So therefore, they can lend. Their total reserves are 200 million. Okay, and they must hold back that amount of money. So therefore, the amount that they are available to lend, and they want to lend as much as they can, friends, let's not forget that. And I will expect you to be able to do an assignment like this. Okay, now I'm doing this on the fly. I will check these numbers before I post them for you. I think everything is correct, but I like to check my math before we do anything, okay? So I'm just going to save that. All right, so that's a demo of what we saw. That's the first tool of the three that the Fed Reserve uses. The second tool is the discount rate. They can also control the money supply by the interest rate that member banks and the Federal Reserve charge each other. Every time some bank borrows from another bank, they have to pay them interest, and that interest is at a rate either between the banks, called the federal funds rate, this is all in the text, or at the discount rate, slightly higher. That's what you have to pay if you borrow from the Federal Reserve. That's the discount rate, okay? So please know what those rates mean, and this is all going to be found on page 52 and 53. I brought you to the third and most important fine-tuning tool that the Fed uses, and that is open market operations, okay? So, I was showing you the other day something called the deposit expansion effect, okay? This is where we left off, roughly on line 39, as I was showing you what happens when $10,000 of brand new money, enters the banking system. Right now it's a woman named, what did I call her, Amanda, and we're seeing how different people that her money has gone to through the financial intermediary we call a bank, okay? Every time someone borrows money from a bank and then uses it to buy something, then that next person deposits it, the bank loans it out to someone. Okay, money is being created, okay? So we've gotten along to a few people here, Amanda, Kathy, Amy, okay, and now, no, forget about Amy, we haven't dealt with Amy yet, Arlene. Okay, so Amanda believes she's got $10,000 in her bank. Okay, now every bank, I'm making it simple, no bracketed reserve requirements like page 52. Here I'm just saying, to make the math easy, let's make it a flat 10% because I'm trying to illustrate a concept here, not complicate the math. Okay, so at this point, Bank 2 has $8,100 available. Okay, so that's how much they can loan, and Amy comes along, she borrows all of it. Bank 2 is going to loan Amy $8,100 to, the bank will loan it to Amy to start her business, and she buys equipment from Bob in order to get her business started. Okay, so at this point, what do we have? She's going to buy her equipment from a guy named Bob, and Bob takes his $8,100 and sticks it in the bank. Everyone's got money in the bank now, except for Kathy and Arlene. Okay, none of these people know each other. Kathy and Amy. Forget about Arlene, I'm messing up my names here. Kathy and Amy each have a business they've borrowed from a bank. They have assets in their business, as you learned in financial accounting, but they also have a loan payable to their bank, okay? But let's look at it from the viewpoint of the people who received the money. Amanda, as far as she's concerned, has $10,000 in the bank, okay? Arlene, who sold equipment to Kathy, has $9,000 in the bank. And Bob just received $8,100. Now his bank is going to hold back 10% of that and loan to someone else. So money is being created. How much cash has been created so far? All right, Amanda has 10 grand, Arlene has 9 grand, Bob has 8,100. Okay? So study this for me. If you add those three people up, only $10,000 entered the system, but now there's 27,100. That is the expansion of deposits. The deposit expansion effect. Amazing, huh? What offsets all those numbers from an accounting point of view? Paper, assets, and the good faith and credit of everyone in this stream so far. All right, now, I matrixed this out. I could take this thousands of people into the future, people and banks into the future for you, but I gave you a demonstration here in Excel, starting with Amanda's 10,000. Everyone holds back 10%, every bank holds back 10%, leaving the other 90% available. So we're looking at the cumulative amount of cash. By the time we get to our third person, that's Amanda, then we have this person, we have this person. The total cumulative is 17,100 more, okay? Including Amanda, that's $27,100. So 10,000 has miraculously, through our banking system, and all these people, grown into $27,000. So I just took this on and on and on and on, and you can see that the number is approaching 90,000. So I just stopped there. It will go on to infinity, actually. There's something in my book called Zeno, Z-E-N-O, Zeno's paradox, which explains why. That's later on around page 130 something. Okay, but the point is, new money, when it's introduced into our banking system, creates more money. So here's how we figure it out. I need you to know this formula, friends. You will see this again. All right, the change in the cash supply, the money supply, is going to be in this case, 10,000 minus 1,000 divided by 10%. What do those terms mean? Okay, to find the change in checkable deposits, and you'll find this on page 56, take the initial amount of new money that's put into the system minus the very first required reserve amount. In this case, that was 10,000 from Amanda minus the 1,000 her bank had to hold. Okay, so that's nine grand. I'm sorry. Divide that by the flat reserve requirement. I'm making it a flat 10%, a flat amount. Okay, that's going to give you $90,000. Okay, so $10,000 creates $90,000 more in new checkable deposits and cash if you're assuming a flat 10% requirement. Okay, there it is. Okay, going to the text, if I can flash back to the text for a moment. There it is right there. Those are the formulas, okay? So there's another example. Now, forget about Amanda and her measly $10,000. Now, let's pretend in open market operations that the Federal Reserve creates $20 million in new money, and there's a flat reserve requirement for the banking system of 3%. Okay, $20 million, all right, 3% of that is $600,000. So that's our numerator. We divide by 0.03, that's the 3% flat reserve requirement. So if the Federal Reserve injects $20 million of new money into our banking system, this is how money is created, friends, then it's going to create $647 million. Okay, now the Federal Reserve created money. Can they do the opposite? Yes. Okay, when the Fed wants to stimulate the economy, they inject money into the system. I described it in my last lecture as a commodity. When there's more money in the system, there's more to go around, the pie is bigger, it's easier for you to borrow money to start your business. Okay? Now, if things get too exuberant and the economy grows too fast, that leads to inflation. So instead of stimulating the slowdown, now the government says, whoa, it's too good. We've got to put the brakes on. Now we have inflation. There's too much money, too many dollars chasing a finite amount of goods. As I said the other day, that will lead to higher prices, inflation. The government does not want that either. They will put on the brakes and do the opposite of this to pull money out of the supply, okay? So somewhere in the middle, you can see where the Federal Reserve has a very careful game they have to play of balance between making sure the economy is stimulated and yet growth is not runaway as well. If they contract the money supply, there's a shrinking pie and more people are after it, and that means interest rates will go up, the amount of money that people will pay to get a piece of it. Okay? So that is how open market operations work, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, if there are questions, make sure you get in touch with me. What is interest? A lot of people say interest is the cost of money. It's not. It's the cost of credit. Okay? Specifically in economics, credit has to be allocated. All right? Now, you might have heard of the prime rate. I made a note here for myself that around February of 2017, the federal funds rate was 0.75%. The discount rate, as I've defined already, is 1.25%. And the prime rate was 3.75%. What is the prime rate? Okay, forget about banks lending to banks and banks borrowing from other banks. Okay, now let's bring in real market borrowers. The prime rate, ladies and gentlemen, is the rate that banks will, the rate that banks will charge their very best customers, their most creditworthy customers. Think of people like Pepsi Cola, General Electric, Pfizer, all of those people have to borrow, and they call up their bank and say, I need to borrow $1 million for a couple of days. At what rate will you lend to me? Well, the banks are going to lend to them at the best rate they can get, the prime rate. Okay, so think of the prime rate as the rate that banks will charge their very, very best people. Okay? All right, so what is it that makes interest rates different for you and me? If my credit rate is terrible and your credit rating is good, then we both walk into a bank and the bank will say, oh, we'll charge you 3 or 4%, but we'll charge Alan a lot more because his credit's terrible. So what the bank is doing essentially is they're allowing for risk. In the very first lecture, the very first chapter, we said that risk and reward have to go hand in hand. Well, that means that the bank may refuse to lend to me, but they have another choice too. They can lend to me even though my credit rating is not that good, but because they're taking on more risk with me, they'll charge me a higher rate than they will charge you. So interest rates are based on risk. Now, the people that I polled to pull all this together, this chapter together, some people said, oh, there were really only 3 elements of risk. Other people said there were 10. Looking at all these different sources, I found that there really were 5 that everyone seems to have in common. So those are the ones I used. 1 basic rate, and then 4 elements of risk based on top of that. So it's going to be like making a sandwich. Everyone starts with 1 basic rate, and then based on the level of risk involved, we add layer upon layer upon layer of reward for the lender. That is how an interest rate is created. Okay, so there are going to be 5 in this class. There will be 5 different influences. And as we look at instruments of different levels of risk, they will contain a couple or they will contain all of the elements that I will mention to you. Okay, these are the 5 elements. A basic level and then 4 layers of compensation to the lender or to the investor for that matter. You could be doing the lending or investing yourself. We're going to start with a real risk-free rate, an inflation premium, a maturity risk premium, a default risk premium, and a liquidity premium. Okay? So we are going to start with what's known as the real risk-free rate. Okay? Real. When you hear the word real, that means no inflation. Now, in a perfect world with no inflation, and we know that does not exist, okay, the real risk-free rate would be that level of interest that you would expect at a minimum for the temporary absence of your money by loaning it to someone else. Now, there is no inflation. It's a perfect world. So this is going to be a very, very, very low nominal rate, okay? The real risk-free rate is noted as R asterisk or R star. And whenever you see the word real, it means after inflation. There is no inflation, okay? Let's take the rate of interest that you are paid by your bank. Now, rates are really low right now, but let's make it easy and say that interest rates paid to you by your bank where you deposit money are 3%. Okay, sounds good. You made 3%, right? Okay, wait, not so fast. First, remember, interest is taxable, so you're going to have to take a little piece of that 3% and pay the government, okay? So let's say you've got 2% left, okay? That is your rate of return after taxes. But is it your real rate of return? No, it's not, because that 2% has to cover inflation, all right? So let's say inflation is 1.5%. So that means after adjusting for inflation, you really only walk away with 0.5%. Now, inflation is higher than that, so this is why you must be investing, because what your bank is paying you right now for a standard checking or savings account is not enough to keep up with inflation. So please remember, the very baseline that we start with is called the real risk-free rate. Okay? No elements of risk, there is no risk, not even inflation. And we denote that as R star. Okay? Now let's get back to something I mentioned to you earlier, the short-term U.S. Treasury bill. In the world economy, that's considered to be just about the safest place you can have your money. The U.S. T-bill, it's a short-term obligation of the United States government. That means it's going to mature in less than 1 year. Now, people ordinarily call this the risk-free rate. It's not the real risk-free rate. Why? Because even a U.S. T-bill has to have an element built into its interest rate to cover inflation. Remember, inflation exists no matter what. The real risk-free rate pretends we're in a perfect world where inflation does not exist. So the risk-free rate, as we define it here, and this is going to be the basis of many things we do in this course, is going to be R star plus a premium for inflation risk. Now, we don't know what that inflation rate is going to be, and I'm out of time, folks, so I'm going to end it here. But please remember, we don't know in the long term or even the moderate term what the inflation rate will be. We can pretty much judge it for the short term, and T-bills are short term. So if you take the real risk-free rate and add on compensation for the short-term perspective of what we think inflation is, that's going to give you R sub RF, the risk-free rate, and we're going to consider that in this class to be the rate of return on a T-bill. Okay? I'm going to end us here, and as always, if you have questions, let me know. I'm also going to be posting a separate video to cover the homework from Chapter 2, the end of Chapter 2, and then later on for Chapter 3. Okay? More information on Chapter 3 to come, and take care.